Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Laura Saimoto, and I'm a volunteer and project lead for this project called the Okaeri Oral History Project. Return from Exile, All Paths Lead Home. I'm here at the Nikkei National Museum with our panel of 4 seniors this morning. Dr. Aki Horii sitting right beside me here. I'll be the moderator for today's event. And also we have our other project lead is Linda Kawamoto Reid, and she's tuning in from home. So she is going to introduce the project for us, and then we'll go right into introducing the seniors. So take it away, Linda.
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Kawamoto Reid, the reference archivist at the Nikkei National Museum. And thanks for joining our launch today for the Okaeri project. It's an amazing collection of 21 oral histories. And it was made possible by the BC Redress Japanese Canadian Survivors Health and Wellness Fund. And both the Nikkei National Museum and the Language School are grateful, like really grateful, for this precious legacy that we are leaving for future generations. And I just want to give a shout out to Adam P.W. Smith for his generous and diligent production of these videos and patiently guiding me and Laura through the editing process, which we've just finished a few days ago. And to Darius Mays at the Language School for handling the admin aspects of the project, and to Nicola today, who is monitoring the chat and may put the link to the videos on our chat so that you all can see them later. We will also have a question period at the end. So the Okaeri project initially was the brainchild of Miki Hirai, who you can see there, who is extremely passionate about the kika-nisei story, about telling more stories about it. And the kika-nisei are the second generation, mostly children who were either in Japan as children or deported there during the Second World War, and who returned to Canada, likely the place of their birth. And of the 21 people who participated in this project, 8 of them were kika-nisei, and I will name them: Miki Hirai, Roy Ueda, Sumiko Urata, Shigeyoshi Ibata, Kazue Kozaka, Frank Hamanishi, Harry Mizuta, and Toshiko Kajiwara. All of their stories are unique and compelling and different. Today you'll get a little snippet, an example from Miki, who is on the panel. So as the project progressed, Laura Saimoto and myself, as the interviewers, wanted to find one word in Japanese that was common to all these 21 stories, and it was Okaeri, returning home. We felt that the concept of Okaeri in the context of internment, forced displacement, deportation, resettlement back to Vancouver or the area, in spite of all the odds that their families endured, speaks to the resilience and determination of those affected by the war. And perhaps, just perhaps, Okaeri may have been a grounding or a guiding force to some to return home. And to Laura and myself, we clearly recognize the identity struggles of some of the individuals as they made the decision, for example, to leave post-war Japan and return to Canada, which must have been quite a wrenching decision to make on their own in some situations. So the other participants in the project are Mitzi Owada, Mary Kawamoto, Grace Ego Thompson, Don Iwanaka, Denny Enjo, Yoshie Kurita, Vicky Fukui, Sharon Kawasaki, Howard Shimokura, Bill Kajiwara, and the three on the panel today, Dr. Aki Horii, Yvonne Wakabayashi, and Frank Kamiya. These 13 stories about the return to Vancouver and the Vancouver Japanese Language School also explore the impact that Japanese culture had on their lives and identity as they found a home in many places in the interim. So without further ado, let's go to the panel and have them introduce themselves and a brief summary of your family background. And I'll hand it over to you guys over there on the panel.
Thanks, Linda. So we're going to start the introductions with Dr. Aki Horii, sitting right here. So Dr. Horii, do you want to start with your introduction?
You want me to talk about pre-war?
Your family introduction and your pre-war.
My name is Akira, Aki for short, Horii. I was born in October 1931, so I'm 91 years of age. I'm going on 92 this year. And I'm going to talk about pre-war with Japan and what it was like growing up in Vancouver. I was a happy, carefree child, and I have said a lot of things about myself in previous interviews. So I'm going to concentrate what time I have on food, meals, and because I don't have much time. So my parents, being immigrants, could not speak English, and we spoke Japanese both at home, at the Japanese language school, even amongst our friends. Japanese was a spoken language. Anyways, my mother did not know how to cook Western meals, so we ate mainly Japanese meals, vegetables, fish, because my father being a lingcod fisherman. And I want to give you a bit of tidbits of what time I have of about eating Western meals. Anyways, one incident is attending Lord Strathcona Elementary School. One day they were showing a movie called Ganga Din. It was about a young Hindu kid helping the British army fight the rebels in India. Anyways, my mother gave me 5 cents or 10 cents. And for the first time, I entered the school cafeteria and I noticed a pot of something. So I picked it up and took it to the table and ate it. And it was so delicious, I never forgot it. And the top layer was mashed potatoes, and underneath was ground beef, and it was meat pie. And it was the first time I ate a Western style food, and that meat pie was so delicious. And I remember eating the eating utensil was very simple, chopsticks. We never used knives or forks, and we used a spoon to drink soup. And my mother made porridge in the morning. We would call it mush in those days. And milk was delivered to our door by the milkman in a horse-drawn cart. We never had a refrigerator, so we had an ice box, and the iceman would bring a block of ice to put into the ice box. And that was the sort of thing. And when I finally, when the war ended and I graduated from Little High School in 1949 and came to UBC in the same year, and I stayed at a boarding home on Dunbar and 26th. And the landlady was so kind to me. She taught me how to use a fork and knife and other utensils for the first time. Those are my memories. I read the interview by Grace Thompson, and she used 4 Japanese words, which then gave me remembered those 4 words that were used almost every day. One was itemairimasu, which means I'm now leaving for school. And then when I came home from school, I would say tadaima, and that means I am home. And my mother probably would say Okaeri, and this is the theme of this interview, Okaeri, coming home. And the other 2 Japanese words were itadakimasu, which means I'm going to enjoy my meal. And then at the end of the Japanese meal, I would say gochiso-sama, which means I am finished and I enjoyed the meal. And I don't have much more time. That's it? Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Horii. Now we're going to go to Miki Hirai, and he's going to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. I appreciate everybody coming to look at our event here because it's for me it's very dear to speak to a lot of people as possible. I think my background is kika-nisei. That means I was born in Canada, but lived in Japan after the war, in my case, and returned back to Canada. So on my YouTube presentation, you're gonna see 4 sections of my family. One is before the war, starting with my grandfather, both sides. One of my grandfather came to Canada at 1893 to Vancouver. And other grandfather came 1906 to Vancouver. My mother was born in Canada. And so the story takes from there. What's happened to them? What's happened when war broke out? I have a story there. Then I was born, we were at the Spokane internment camp. I was born there. For me, that was lucky for me, because if it wasn't for war, I wouldn't be here. Okay, so because of the war, I'm here. So I have some stories to tell there in the slow camp from what I learned from my parents. Then something happened after the war. Some of us had to move out from internment camp to rest of Canada because of the rule applied by the government. But our family decided to move back to Japan. And that's why from 3 to 12 years old, I live in Japan. That's after the war, Japan. So I could tell you what took place just after the war. Then after, it took our family in total 10 years to come back from Japan. It took us 4 years. My brother came first, followed by me 2 years later. Another 2 years later, my father came back. Then our new life started in Canada. And that's a different story. That's where I had a most struggle, because at that time I was 12 then. And I could tell you about what I had to do or what I had to walk through to get into Canadian society. And I had many experience, good time, bad time. You name it, I think I faced it all. But I know for a fact our family, my parents was a really worst position because in 3 times in their lifetime, they lost everything. Before the war, during the war, after the war, then when we returned to Canada, we had nothing again. So our life was kind of 3 time lifetime story. So that I will be telling you on YouTube. So I hope you come and take a look. And all of us Nikkei here, living here, we have a different background. And you'll be so interested, I'm sure. We look the same. We say Nikkei, we look all the same, but we are not. So it is time we learn from each other so that we know who we are to begin with and for the future of our children. And hopefully we could do something for lots of new Canadian immigrants. Okay, that's be my story.
Thank you, Frank. Next, we'd like to introduce Frank Kamiya, sitting right beside Miki.
My name is Frank Hiroshi Kamiya, and I was born in 1938. We lived in Pitt Meadows at that time. My father was Jiro Tsuneki Kamiya, and he was born in 1910 in Oshika, Shizuoka-shi, Japan. He had 2 young brothers and 2 young sisters. He immigrated to Canada, excuse me, in 1933. My mother, Toniko Kamiya, was born in 1913, and she was the eldest of 5 sisters. My parents were married in 1936, and since my mother's family had no male heirs to carry on the name, my father agreed to change his name from Tsuneki to Kamiya, which is sort of the Japanese custom. I don't know if it's, I see that some people have done it here as well. In 1942, as many of you know, the Japanese Canadians were forced to move 100 miles east of the BC coast. Our family, just to keep the family together, they decided to relocate to a place called Oak Bluff, which is close to Winnipeg. And my father being a carpenter, he was asked to build a lot of these so-called internment houses, which are very small. And in fact, the one that we had 3 families there. My family with 2 children, that's 4, and then 2 other families that young families with no children. My brother and I had a lot of fun playing with our neighbor's children as well. They were about our age, and we used to talk to them in Japanese at the beginning, and they would speak to us in English. And somehow we were able to communicate, and after a while we had a common language, I guess. Their parents couldn't say Hiroshi for my Japanese name, so they said, well, we're just going to give you a name, Frank, and that stuck with me for till now, actually. My brother's name was Atsushi, and they changed it to Archie, which is a little closer to that. So I'll leave that for now, and we'll talk about the other things later.
Thanks, Frank. And next we have our very soul woman on our panel, Yvonne Wakabayashi, and she's gonna introduce herself. And also we're just really, really grateful that it was very hard for us to get women to show up and share. So we're very grateful to Yvonne for showing up and really sharing her story with us. So she's gonna introduce herself.
Okay.
My name is Yvonne Yoshimi Wakabayashi. My maiden name was Tasaka, a very large family of 17 children. And I'll start with my father, my grandfather first, who immigrated to North America. He went to Portland first, but then he decided to come to Salt Spring Island in near Vancouver. My grandfather was born actually in he came in 1893. And my father was born on Salt Spring Island in 1906. And at age 6, as they often did with the oldest son in the family, he was sent to Japan to live with his grandmother for his education. And so there he spent most of his early years. He managed, in spite of all the hardships that he had with a very poor family and not receiving his tuition at university, he did manage to go to university and completed his education there, yes, at the Waseda University. And then he married my mother in Japan, a neighbor, and together they started their life in Vancouver. And that would have been 1937. And they settled in Kitsilano because there was a Kitsilano Japanese language school near Granville Island, actually. And they were teachers. My father was the principal of the school, and my mother was a teacher. And there, the 3 children were born. My brother was born in 1937, and I was born in 1938, and my younger brother in 1940. And then soon after that, of course, the war started, and so we had to move. And my father wanted very much to keep the family together, as a lot of families tried. And luckily, people reached out to him, and he was able to put together a team of brothers, 5 of them, and they were employed at a sawmill in a place called Seymour. First of all, we went to Chase area. The place was called Harp Valley, near Kamloops. That was our first move. And then from there, we went to way up in the mountains, a remote area called Seymour Arm. And there was no one else there but our family and the workers. And then we went on to Blind Bay, and that was on the Shoe Shop Lake because of school. There was no school in the other 2 places, but when my brother started school at age 6, my father felt felt that the need was there for us to move to where there was a school. So it was Blind Bay, a lovely place actually, by the water. And the kindness that was shown to us there was a teacher that picked up my brother and I, grade 1 and 2, and took us to school in the morning across the lake. I just like to focus on a lot of the kind things that people did for us. And so our memory of that time is quite happy moments, carefree, lots of free time with nature. And so then I guess we returned to Vancouver in 1949, as most people did, and the story goes on. All right.
Thanks, Yvonne. So as you can see, everyone's like, I think one thing that really this project showed us is that, over 22,000 Japanese Canadians were interned, but all of their stories are so diverse and so rich in just how different their experiences were. And I think this is what this story really showed us, is that though, the internment was the overall experience, I think you can see from just the 4 of them and introducing their family stories, how diverse the stories were. So to illustrate this more, each of the seniors is going to tell us a few story highlights from their interviews, which are on the videos. And so they're going to tell us a couple of stories which they felt stood out for them from their their videos. So you can look forward to watching these, like, this is the movie trailers for the videos. So Dr. Horii.
What's the question? You wanted me to,
Your story
Oh.
highlights,
my story highlight?
whichever story you want to tell.
I've said a lot in my interview, but I could divide my whole life into segments of 10 years. 10 years pre-war with Japan, living in Vancouver. 10 years in the 50s, working hard, studying hard, going to university and getting my MD degree in 1960. And then post 1960, I practiced family medicine for 48 years. And in my retirement, I was 78 when I retired, but I got bored after a few months. So I started teaching or giving talks to school kids, elementary, high school, university kids, and the students will come here to the Nikkei Center. I would visit different schools, high schools, even UBC, Queensland University. We had students from Kyoto University. I talked to students from Purdue University, Indiana, where a professor brought some students to learn about the Japanese-Canadian internment. So I've been enjoying doing that, and I have done over 80 talks over the last number of years, and I'll keep doing it as long as I can, as long as my memory stays intact. So that is my sort of a short life history.
Is there one story from East Lillooet that you could tell us, share with us?
East Lillooet, I attended grade 6, 7, and 8 in the elementary school built by the men folks in East Lillooet, paid for by the men folk in the families of East Lillooet. And then when the war ended, I was able to go to Lillooet High School. We had to cycle 4 miles each way, even in the coldest day of winter with icy roads and so on. And I graduated in 1949, but I had a wonderful teacher by the name of Ernie Hayes, who was a bachelor, and he must have been about 34 years of age, but to me, as a teenager, he was an old man. But I never appreciated his ability as an educator, because he taught me grades 10 and 11, and he taught 4 subjects: English, French, math, and science. And he taught 4 grades 10, 11, and 12. And he left in 1948. I had really finished my high school education in 1948. I was lacking one course. So I had to go back to Lillooet High School for another year, and actually took correspondence courses, senior matriculation courses from Victoria. And when I became friends with Ernie Hayes, because after a few years, Ernie Hayes went to the University of Washington in Seattle and got his PhD degree. He then traveled further south and met a lady in Portland, Oregon, and he got married there. And he joined the faculty of the University of Portland in Portland, and he eventually became double dean, dean of education, and dean of graduate studies. And my friends from Lillooet High School, there were 4 of us, Niseis, and we would travel down, take the car down to Portland and have a social visit with him. And Ernie Hayes would come up to Vancouver several times. He stayed at my residence several times, and I realized what a wonderful educator he was. So with that background, he encouraged me to get a post-secondary education. So I was able to go to UBC in 1949, and I became an MD on the focusing of an English friend who became my lab partner in second year university. And I had to take 2 years out of university from 1950 to 52, and I became a commercial fisherman. And I had to help my family financially to get them back to Vancouver, which they did in 1951. And we had nothing. There was no home, and my father had to get a fishing boat. So I became a commercial fisherman, full-time commercial fisherman for 2 years. I returned to UBC in 1952. And in the meantime, going back to university, I stayed as a commercial fisherman, a gillnet fisherman for BC Packers up in the Skeena River. And so I fished for a total of 7 seasons. So I'll stop there.
Miki, could you share with us some stories highlights
Okay.
from your video?
All right. I guess I ought talk about what affected me other than my family as a whole thing, whole history to tell. But for me, after returning back to Japan, and went to school in Japan in the countryside, and this was post-war, after the war. That's when we returned. Our grandfather, who was went back from Canada before the war, living in Shingaken. And we thought we'll be welcome, but actually we were not. Because my father's youngest brother was a Navy soldier, Navy man. And he came back alive from a war with, actually we could say Canadians with us, against us. So that turned another thing upside down for our family. So my parents had a hard time, but it didn't affect me that much because my mother and father let me do everything freely. So I went to school like any other people, did everything I want to do. So I did very well in Japan, actually. Yeah, I was doing very good in education, top 3 in the whole class and so forth. Play baseball. I was hitting third batter, home run batter all the time. But then around age 12, my parents said, we're going to go back to Canada. Until then, I probably didn't know anything about Canada, nothing. Everybody in Japan, they say America. It doesn't matter where you're from, Canada, they say America ni kaeru. So that's what happened. But was part of my life, for my experience, when I came back to Canada. First time I landed in Vancouver, it's fine. Then we had to go to Taber, Alberta, to live there. Because uncle and dad, they sponsor us. We live in a farmhouse. So if you work for some farmers in Tabor, you were given small house to live on it so that you could help them out all the time throughout. That was one was the, I guess, agreement. So we went at the house, and that's where I got first shock. So I live in Japan, but when I went to Tabor, there was no electricity, no water, just like a septic tank. And that they built it after we moved in. And of course, with that, I compare with Japan. Before I came, even at in the countryside, we had electricity, we had water. But I come to Canada, I say, is this America? I say, no light, just a lamp. And then I had to go to school, right? Then it's how do I go to school? School bus came and picked me up, but I was so scared because I can't speak any English, period, anything. And we didn't have no car, no hotel. How do I going to communicate if I ever get lost? Because the school is only about 5-6 miles away. That's very close in the Tabor. So that's where I got scared. And I said, first time in my life, I said to my mother, I don't want to go to school. I'm so scared. And that's when I got first wake up call from my mother. That's the first time in her life she got mad at me. She said, you better go. You must go. So I went, but I must tell you, I was the biggest guy in the classroom. I was 12 and all other kids are 5 because there's no such special school at that time. So everybody said, gee, everybody said, oh, this is the biggest. Or the other guy there, ever seen one their age, this and I was the same age. But I can't speak anything. So I sat there and watched them what they do. Draw a picture of chicken and whatever, cow and farm. And of course, math is nothing. I went to grade 5, so it's so easy, but it was nothing. That was the start of my life in Canada. So really, what I had in Japan till then and after that, really, what do you call it, depressed me a lot. But in the right side, one highlight I have is on the bus, everybody starts singing a song. And that song was, Oh Magda, the harder farm. I said, yeah, and I know that part. That's in Japanese, yeah. So I only sang the part, yeah. Everybody likes that. And I guess that was one of the highlights of my life when I was at Tabor. But other than that, I have a whole thing to tell, but I pass it on to others.
Great, thank you. And Frank and Yvonne, could you tell us a bit about some highlights that have to do with sort of how you became aware of Japanese culture and Canadian culture and sort of what that looked like for both of you?
When we were growing up in Oak Bluff, there were not many other kids around there. So we didn't have any interaction with any other Japanese Canadians, except maybe we would go visit some friends by car, and that would be maybe down to Emerson or Whitemouth, Ontario, that my dad had a friend. So all our interaction was with the Haujing people or the Caucasian people around our area. But in the summertime, we had a lot of fun being 4 or 5 years old. Our neighbor had a pony, and their dad made a cart for that. So 2 kids would sit on that, and we'd ride all over the place, and that was great fun. There's always something to do in the farm. We were, as boys, we would try and see if we can drown out the gophers. So we'd bring buckets of water, and not knowing that those tunnels are going all over you. 10 buckets in there, nothing, we never got anything. But there's, and then we picked Saskatoon berries, and we had so much fun there. Other than that, we in 1946, my third brother was born, and in 1948, in July, I think it was, that we moved to Kamloops, BC, and stayed there for a year. And my, in fact, in Kamloops, the first time that we had really met other Japanese Canadians, which was quite nice, we felt. In 1949, we moved to Vancouver, where my dad got a job with Matsumoto Shipyards, and he was the foreman for all the interior work on the boats. And that's where we got to meet a lot of the Japanese Canadians. First of all, we met people at the Japanese language school when we started in probably around 1950 or 451. That's where I met Yvonne as well. And again, the social life started to happen around that time. As I mentioned in the video, Yvonne and some of the other girls taught us how to dance. We still don't know how to dance very well, but it was a lot of fun. And our group got together with other Japanese Canadians and quite a few Chinese Canadians as well. And we had house parties. We had this thing called Miss Valentine's Contest. I think Yvonne was in there and probably won as well.
Yeah.
But we had some great times there. I guess at the same time we were, during the summer, our parents sort of asked us to go and make some money, basically, or just to get us out of the house. So we went strawberry picking.
Yeah.
And we had some great times picking strawberries in Mount Lehman, where a bunch of us, actually it was about 4 or 5 people, 4 boys actually, that went to Katsumoto's in Mount Lehman. And next door were the Okabes, and I think Yvonne was there.
I was at the Fukawas, Stan
Okay.
Fukawa's family.
Yeah, anyhow, we had some great times there, and occasionally in the weekends, we'd all pile into the back of a pickup truck and go to a movie in Mission or Aldergrove, and that's the first time we got together with the girls there. I don't know what else I can tell. Maybe if, Yvonne, you can tell us about what we did beyond that.
I wasn't going to talk about all that. Well, we are the same age.
Right.
And so, our experiences are very similar. And we did a lot of things together, whether it was in the summertime, helping, the family with a little bit of extra money for clothes and going to the PNE and that kind of thing. And then, of course, for myself, I did work at the West Vancouver fish cannery, which gave me more experience. And I met more Japanese friends there that I'm still friends with, and they all belong to our coffee group once a week. So the Japanese culture, continued on. I was only 3.5 when we were interned, and my mother and father from Japan. Of course, it was a Japanese language. Many of the things were very much Japanese custom. So I think that part of it was developed very early in my life. And I was thinking the other day about things for this program. And I was thinking about the way my mom educated us. It was very subtle. Like she would sing songs like Japanese folk songs, children's songs, that I recall. And And then she would tell us stories like Urashima Taro, or, the other ones that there's always a moral to the story, at the end. And I think in that way, she sort of taught us a little bit more about values and right and wrong. Food, of course, mothers always provide food. And so we had a lot of, I guess it was food that we were sent out into the forest to pick, like dandelion leaves, in place of spinach. And of course, we had, my brother said we used to have to pick the tops of the fern for warabi. And then, of course, like Frank says, wild berries. So she had to deal with our diet and make sure we had a balanced diet. And of course, meat was rabbits and bears. This is how remote it was. So I think Frank's covered quite a bit. So I'll stop.
Okay.
So that's great. I think we're getting close to the question period, but we just wanted to ask everyone just in a few words what they feel they've learned from their family stories and what they'd like to say to everybody on the screen. So I think we have close to 100 people watching today. Thank you all for coming. But we'd like just to get their hitokoto about what they learned from their stories and what they'd like to say to everybody. So Dr. Horii, take it away.
Family stories?
What you've learned, your lessons. With the lessons that you've learned from your history.
We did hear a lot of stories about pre-war, but the hardship during the internment, and as I keep repeating the same stories to my students when I give my talks, but my family was moved to a place called East Lillooet, 4 miles across the Fraser River on the town of Lillooet. And because of racial discrimination, we were not allowed to cross that bridge to get across to the town. Many of the teenage students missed out on the education because they were not allowed to attend a high school. But we persevered. And as Miki has said, I thought to myself anyways, that East Lillooet was one of the worst internment camps during the war and post-war years. When we got there from Vancouver, via Union steamships to Squamish, PGE railway to Lillooet, and then the back of a truck across the river to East Lillooet. We lived in tar paper shacks, and it was freezing cold in the winter. There was one winter we had to walk down the cliff down to the Fraser River, chop a hole in the ice in the river, and scoop up with buckets of water, which we carried back to our home. And there was no electricity, as you say, Mickey. No drinking water. Drinking water was bought by a wooden barrel. It was trucked in from the town of Lillooet. We needed 6 truckloads of wood for the whole year. And I remember going up behind our village of East Lillooet, up in the mountains with my father, and falling what we called hakamatsu, or red barked pine trees, because they burned well. But we cut them into 6-foot logs, rolled them down the bottom to the bottom of the mountain, had them trucked to the back of the house, cut them into the appropriate lengths of wood, and chopped them. And we needed 6 truckloads of wood. And being self-supporting, it was a real hardship for my parents. And can you imagine my father being a former lingcod fisherman, going to a place like East Lillooet with unemployment? And the first year there was nothing, but the second year there was a very experienced farmer by the name of Mr. Tokutaro Tsuyuki, who came from Haney. And he said East Lillooet with a dry, hot climate would be ideal to grow tomatoes. So he organized small groups of co-ops in the surrounding districts of Lillooet, and soon there were hundreds of acres of tomatoes under cultivation. A tomato cannery was built in the town, and even a fruit packing plant, which gave a boost to the economy of the town. And that's how we survived. But the hardships, I'll never forget my life in East Lillooet as a youngster. I was 10 years of age when I was interned. And through my teenage years, it was nothing but work, work, work. And if I wasn't making money in the farm, tomato farms, or in the cannery, tomato cannery, or the fruit packing plant, we had all that work at home. We had to pack water, that dirty Fraser River water, 10 gallons of water on our back, holding tanks by the road back to the house, and filter that water in wooden barrels with sand, gravel, and so it was quite a hardship. And to remember the hardships of our parents, I vowed to myself that before I died, I wanted some kind of memorial built in East Lillooet to remember their hardships. And that's another story, so I'll stop there.
Thanks, Dr. Horii.
Yeah.
Miki?
Okay. I guess my story, I think is for my grandchildren and my children. Because during our generation, we had to go through all those internment after the war, the start of new life. My hope is our children is continue to do whatever they're doing, because I think right now is the best time of my life, and I hope that best time for my children too. But I realized it always is not that easy. Quick one, I realized when high school I went to United Nations Day. I was representing Japan, and I had to translate Creed for United Nations in Japanese. I still remember it. Because like 人間の価値と進化は男女大小国の国でも同じ基本的権利がある。This is what I said. Basically, it's a fundamental of human rights. Then I realized from the 36 students in my classroom, we were able to translate about 20 different languages. That means all those, my friends, they are all immigrants also. And although we had our own history here, I'm sure those family, whether they came from any place in the world, they must have a hardship. So my thought is, oh gee, we must be friends all the rest of our life, so that our history that took place should never repeat against other ethnic groups. That's where my effort will be for the future, because it can change so fast. But if all the children and grandchildren become friends to each other, I think we could change that. We could be all friends then. We're not gonna hurt all my friends. And that is my hope for our future generation. And I like to pass it on.
Thank you, Miki. That's great. Frank and Yvonne?
Okay, we don't have much time, but I got involved with the history preservation of the Greater Vancouver Japanese Citizens Association in early 1980s, maybe 1980 or 81. And ever since that, being introduced to that, I've been trying to advocate, with our Japanese Canadian friends, and also we see this Okaeri project as well. I'd like to see that expanded a little bit more as well. Trying to get as many of us Japanese Canadians that are left to tell their story and preserve it and share it with the Nikkei National Museum, which they're going to do with this project. You?
Yes, my turn.
Yeah.
I think with my grandchildren and the future generation, I'd like them to remember the acts of kindness that was shown to my family. And I focus on that. Also, I think, pay tribute to our parents that made life the way it is. And I lived in 4 different homes during the internment, and my memories are different in each, but like they say, home is where the heart is. And I know my mom and dad did the best they could to keep it as normal, although there were a lot of challenges. And I can't forget that memory. The one more thing I'll say in the last 30 seconds, is the choice of word, Okaeri. When I heard that was what we were going to be called in this series, it really brought like a emotion, because it made me think about my mother. We came back and we were in a dressmaking store and lived behind the store. She was always working, and she would I would come in the door and she would look up at me from her sewing machine and she would say, Okaeri. And it had so much meaning. It was like, how was your day? How did school go? And so it makes me very emotional, that word, welcome home, has so much meaning. So thanks very much.
So thanks. We'd like to really thank our panel of 4 seniors, Dr. Horii, Miki, Frank, and Yvonne, for highlighting the stories of the Okaeri Oral History Project, which we is now launched on the Nikkei National Museum's YouTube channel. So there's 4 stories here, but there's actually 17 videos on the YouTube channel. So just before we go to any kind of questions you have for the panel, we really encourage you to, well, first of all, we thank all of the seniors, all 21 of them, for sharing their stories, sharing their lives, and also very publicly, so because everyone can watch them. And we really encourage everyone in the audience to watch these stories, because they do show all of these different nuances and subtleties and the richness of the actual experience and the differences in all of the experiences. So we encourage you to watch them, like it's like watching a TV show without ads. So we encourage you to watch them. And we thank the Seniors Wellness Fund for the grant, and also the Nikkei National Museum and the Vancouver Japanese Language School for partnering on this really, really important legacy project. So with that, Linda, are there any questions from the audience?
Are there any questions you want to put in the chat? I can see the chat. Nicola is also there to see the chat, but I don't see any questions there.
And we also have a little audience here in the room with us, so if anyone wants to say anything. We also have Grace April Thompson here. She's also gave an interview, and her story is so interesting as well. She was actually, they went out to Manitoba as well during the internment. So are there any questions from the chat? Anything, issues you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, there's a couple. So the first one is, how willing were your parents to talk about their internment experience? And maybe we can not hear from everybody, but just someone who wants to speak to that.
So how willing were your parents to talk about the internment experience?
For myself, they they didn't say anything about that to us until, we got older and I got involved with the community probably after 1980s. And they weren't really bitter about it. They used the word kika-nisei. It couldn't be helped. And they just kept it to themselves, didn't want to burden the kids with any negative things.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was pretty typical of the first generation to the second generation. Okay, so another question is, what would you say to young Japanese Canadians wanting to reconnect to their heritage when their family was interned and their culture was suppressed? Who would like to answer that?
I think what we are doing is the first step. I think if you care, you should come and join many of the Nikkei community, so you could firsthand get the experience. And once you learn it, I think to me, you learn from experienced person, but key for me is that younger generation should never repeat what happened to us for any ethnic group in Canada. We gotta make Canada a different place. That is the goal, I think, of the Nikkei community for the future, because we got history, real history to talk about. So if we could expand it together with everybody, I think we're gonna make Canada a better place for every new Canadian, to anybody who's living here. So that would be my message, or try to do it. I really don't know how to do it, but this could be the first step. We should get together.
Thanks, Miki. Another question. So often the older generation are reticent to talk about their stories. Can the panelists offer any suggestions for how to get these conversations going within families?
I'm hearing it.
How to, people may hesitate in sharing their stories, but can you give some advice to encourage people to share their story?
Within a family.
Within a family.
Share the stories.
It's hard to talk about it for some people, but you guys talked about your
Yeah.
story.
My thinking is that I grew up as a Nisei, and I didn't know what racism was, because Niseis played with Niseis. And for example, when the war started with Japan, 630 students, Nisei students, had to leave Strathcona and emptied half the school. But in our generation, our parents expected us to marry another Nisei. But in the next generation, the Sansei, there's no more Japantown. Our lives sort of centered around Japantown, Japanese language school, but for my children, there is no Japantown. the Japanese Canadian population is scattered right across the country. And so now they have the highest percentage of interracial marriages. For instance, of my 4 children, they are all married to non-Japanese people. And so my grandchildren are all half Japanese, half Caucasian, half Chinese. But I want them to retain their Japanese culture. And some years ago, about 6, 7 years ago, I took my oldest 2 grandsons to Japan. And I said, here's half your ancestry came from here. So I took them to my parents' village and got them to go to the cemetery and pay their respects there. So the world for the Nikkei community has changed over the years. And I have a feeling that as more and more interracial marriages occur, some children will have only 1/4 Japanese genes. And but if they can learn the Japanese language, it'll be wonderful because it has served me a lot by having gone to the Japanese language school in my childhood days, in my profession. And those are my comments.
So one thing I'd like to just say is that, as advice, I think like as we did with this project, we actually created time and space for these conversations to happen. And I think it's, I think it's really important to make it a priority to make the time, create the time so that our elders can share, make it important for their stories to be heard and told. And so it's very important for us as the younger generations to create that space and time, really time out of our busy lives, to really listen to what happened to them and their stories. And, my uncle Denny Enjo, he also did, an interview, and I heard things I'd never heard before from my uncle, but he shared it because we created a space and the energy for sharing. So that's really, really important. So we encourage everyone to create as a family the time to do this. And I think one way is to actually watch these videos, like have a kind of movie party or something with your families and friends to just kind of create the time and space for that to happen.
I just wanted to say to the panelists that you can't see the chat, but there have been many, many, many comments about, what a wonderful project it is. And thank you so much for sharing. And, everything that you're doing is extremely valuable, et cetera, et cetera. I can't repeat them all, but I just wanted you guys to know that. And then perhaps the last question is to Dr. Horii, that a person, who is it? Oh, maybe I shouldn't say, saw the memorial in Lillooet in 2019, and she saw the name R. Horii on the monument. Is that your family? And that it was very moving to visit the monument, and thank you for your story.
The word R. Horii, the stone monument.
Yes.
Is that related to you?
Yes, my father. Our son.
And she was very moved to see the monument and the garden.
Yes.
That was a.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I guess we're a bit over time, but maybe Linda, could you wrap it up for us?
Sure. Well, just want to thanks again to the panelists who represent all the 21 other stories that were there. I know that there have been, let's just say, emotional waves with doing that. And thank you for your trust in us, because your stories are precious. And you trusted us with them. And I know that, that the intention was to, make sure that there was a widespread dissemination of your stories. However, they were very personal. So, just thanks so much for that. And they're very precious to us. And there have been lots of thank yous also in the chats to you all for sharing, and to the organizers. And so thank you so much, and thank you to the 100 people on the who are viewing this, for being so interested in this. And yeah, keep it going, folks.
Thank you.
Say goodbye.
Bye.
That's a wrap.